Good morning, everyone. My name's James Cadman. I work for Action Sustainability, the organisation behind the Supply Chain Sustainability School. And welcome to this Business Bites webinar on working towards cleaner air, how the plant community is actively tackling air quality and climate change impacts. We've got a couple of hours this morning to hear some really interesting speakers from up and down the value chain in the built environment, to understand how we are working together, how we're collaborating on tackling local air quality, pollution and wider climate change, global warming impacts. So the webinar will be a fairly standard format of speakers, questions, panel Q&A, but we're also going to do some polling of you, the audience, to get your views and inputs as well. If you do have any questions, you'll notice on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen that there is a chat box where you can put in questions, and we'll go through as many of those as we can through the course of the session. Moving on to the agenda. We've got several speakers, as I say, from up and down the value chain. We are going to kick off with Dr. Kevin White from the University of Brighton, who's going to give us an overview of the seriousness of these two key impacts that we are all managing. We'll then move into a polling session for a few minutes where we'll ask you some questions, which will be some useful input for the speakers and for the school more widely on how you're tackling local air quality and global carbon emissions. And I'll tell you how we're going to do that in a minute. Then we're going to move into a session of linked and related presentations from some key players in the built environment value chain. So we've got Andrea Davidson from HS2, followed by Serena Ward from SCS Railways, so Skanska, Costain, Strabag, get the acronym correct, and then ably supported by Sunbelt Rentals, who will be talking about the work that they're providing. So that's a joint presentation from Tom Welland and Christian Spence. And then we've got an interesting case study from Nigel Blandin, who works for 4 Group CI, part of GAP Group in the Channel Islands, on HVO. We'll then bring it all back together for a panel Q&A with some questions, and that's where we'll take some of your questions as well from the audience and put to them about their processes and procedures for tackling these two issues. And then a final presentation from myself about what the school's plant and equipment group is doing specifically on this area, a group that's been running for 2 or 3 years now, bringing various players across the built environment together to actively address these issues. So onto some practical issues. As I say, do get involved in our polling. We've got a couple of polls through the course of the couple of hours. Like I say, use the chat box if you've got any specific questions. My colleague Rosie will be sharing a link so you can provide feedback after the session, part of what the Supply Chain School does in terms of continual improvement. So we do value your input on that, on the type of subjects you want to hear about and the kinds of speakers you want to hear from as well. And finally, we are recording this session and we'll be making that through a link and the slides themselves available afterwards. So if you want to frantically scribble some notes, by all means do so, but the slides will be made available, as will the recording. Okay. In terms of the polling function that I'll be running in a little bit after Kevin has given his presentation, we're going to use a platform called Mentimeter. If you've been on any Supply Chain School webinars before or any of our workshops, I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's a very simple piece of software, in effect, to get your opinions and get your views. When we get to the right time, all you need to do is go to a new tab, a new page on your browser, either in your phone or on your laptop, and go to www.mentee.com. Do not put in the full mentimeter.com, because that'll take you to the page where you set up these polling systems. But if you want to engage and participate, it's simply mentee.com. And when you get there, you'll be asked for a 7-digit PIN. It's not the one that's on the screen, so don't be confused by that. I'll give you the correct code when we get there. As it says on the screen, don't disconnect from the webinar, stay where you are. You can do this separately on another tab or ideally on your phone. That's normally the best way it works. Okay, and our first presenter is Dr. Kevin White, Principal Lecturer in Atmospheric Science at the University of Brighton, and he's going to set the scene for us in the next 10 minutes or so on what the key issues are, why we should be concerned, and how we can take active action against these. So I can see you, Kevin, over to you.
Thanks, James. Thanks very much. And great to be here this morning. Thanks for having me. As James just said, I'm Dr. Kevin White. I'm Director of the University of Brighton's Centre for Earth Observation Science and a Principal Lecturer in Atmospheric Science. And I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about our changing atmosphere, that is air pollution in terms of climate and air quality pollutants. So we're talking about the atmosphere, that beautiful thin blue line that surrounds our planet and allows life to thrive as we know it. And this is just one component of our overall Earth system, which comprises our air, our water, our land, and our life. And this Earth system is undoubtedly changing. We're in a period of great acceleration. The world is rapidly evolving. If we have a look at this graph here on screen, which shows population of the globe since around 1500 onwards to around 2000, we can see this almost exponential increase in population, this burst in people. And on there, you can see little tags which show various developments through time, such as we can see on there the invention of the telegraph, the car, aeroplanes, when we first put man on the moon, personal computers. And we can see how rapidly a lot of different innovations have come along in this time frame. And if we have a look at our atmosphere during this same sort of time frame, we see that the pollutants in our air have a similar sort of trend, that roughly exponential increase going from around 1750 onwards towards present day. And this is because of the effect of humans, but mainly coming from our agricultural and industrial revolutions, where we increased fossil fuel burning, had land use change. We released a lot of carbon and nitrogen into the atmosphere through our agricultural intensification and our industrialization processes. So if we were to take a tin of fresh air, we'd find that it contains 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, the bulk of our atmosphere. But it also, in that last 1%, has got quite a few additives in it as well, things like carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, ozone, methane, and water vapor, which are all naturally occurring. But because of the effect of humans, we've added a whole bunch of other additives into the air as well. These are our air pollutants. So we started to see the problem of air pollution since there was any type of anthropogenic activity, any type of human activity. We see documents of air pollution through history, even going back to ancient Egyptian times. But I guess one of the big catalysts in modern history was the London smog of 1952, where we started to, for the first time, put epidemiology into play and link stuff in the air to impacts on human health. Where if anyone's seen The Crown on Netflix, you'll be familiar with this. They do a really good portrayal of it. In 1952, in the winter, there was this real sort of perfect storm of events where really cold, damp conditions, people were burning a lot of dirty fuel on their fires, producing a lot of black smoke and sulfur dioxide. And as you can see in this graph on the right-hand side, we were starting for the first time to correlate these things with health outcomes. So we found that around 4,000 people died in only 5 days because of this smog event. So a real catalyst for starting our investigations into air pollution, the stuff we were putting into the air, and what we'd actually do about it in terms of mitigation and legislation. So then, just really briefly, what am I talking about when I say air pollution? This is, commonly a common misconception when we talk about it. In terms of air pollution, there are two different types of air pollutants. There are climate pollutants, so-called greenhouse gases that would perturb the Earth's natural greenhouse effect, and air quality pollutants, which have more an effect on environmental and human health. So our main climate pollutants are things like carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and so on, that come from various anthropogenic processes: transport, fossil fuel use, coal and crude oil refinery, natural gas systems, landfills, agriculture, and so on and so forth. And if we have a look at an emissions map for two of these, carbon dioxide on the left and methane on the right for the UK, where yellow colours represent more emissions, blue colours represent fewer emissions. We can see that for carbon dioxide, that emissions map looks like a roadmap. You can see the areas of human activity, our cities and our roads, really starkly, just like a normal road atlas. So you can see that our sort of fossil fuel burning processes are producing a lot of carbon dioxide throughout the UK. For methane, tend to get more in the background. We tend to have a lot more from agricultural processes. So you can see it more higher emissions in the backgrounds. In terms of our air quality pollutants, there's a whole soup of these things being emitted. Things from carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, ammonia from farming, volatile organic compounds, nitrogen dioxide and nitric oxide we hear a lot about from vehicle emissions, ozone, and of course, particulate matter. So all the others are gases. Particulate matter is literally solid particles suspended in the air, like dust and smaller. And we tend to categorize these pollutant emissions really coarsely as being coming from mobile sources like our cars and our aeroplanes, our stationary sources like factories and power plants, area sources like our cities and our farms, and one we don't really think a lot about are natural sources of air pollution. We don't get a lot in the UK, but lightning, volcanic eruptions, forest fires, and so on. But I guess the third one, which a lot of people don't think about, is the atmosphere itself is a source of pollution, because we get atmospheric chemistry. We get a pollutant emitted, and the atmosphere will process it. It will react within the atmosphere to produce different types of pollution, like ozone. Ozone is a secondary pollutant. So if we look at just really quickly, some emissions maps for air quality pollutants in the UK, again, it looks like that CO2 map we saw earlier. It looks like a road map of the UK, particularly for those nitrogen dioxide emissions in the top left-hand corner, where we see a lot coming from traffic from our cities and our road networks. So once they've been released, pollutants get transported. They go from one place to another, and during transport they undergo atmospheric chemistry and they get converted to other different types of pollutants, and then at a different location they'll get deposited either by wet or dry deposition, sort of rain out and sticking to surfaces. So if we look at how pollution is distributed around the globe, we see that sadly it's now really homogeneous. This is satellite imagery of nitrogen dioxide gas averaged throughout a whole year. Where it's red, it's high concentrations. Where it's yellow, it's low concentrations. So you can see here, North and South America, you can see really strongly those clear red colors of high nitrogen dioxide on the east coast of America around New York. And you can pick out the main cities. You can see Los Angeles quite clearly on the west coast. If we switch over to Asia, we see that it's a really more dramatic picture. You can see India is lit up very strongly there with high nitrogen dioxide concentrations, and China is this horrible red scar in the atmosphere because of all of those industrial processes, the high population density. We have really, really bad air pollution that needs to be tackled in China. If we look at our part of the world in Northwest Europe, we see it's not good either. In fact, we live in a global hotspot for air pollution. If we focus in on Northwest Europe, you can see the hotspots. You can see London, Paris, Madrid, Barcelona, Frankfurt, our major cities. And you can see the industry in the Low Countries and the Po Valley being kept in there by the Alps. So yeah, we live in a real hotspot for air pollution in this part of the world. So why do we care then? Well, it's without doubt one of the greatest threats we face as a global society today. It's something we cannot get away from. Air pollution does not stop at borders. It goes from one country to another. The World Health Organization is stating that it's now the fourth highest risk factor for premature deaths worldwide, and that pretty much all of the globe, 92% of the world's population, live in areas that exceed their guidance for air pollution limits, which results in around 6.5 million deaths each year, which is around 12% of all global deaths. And just because of welfare costs alone, because of impacts on health, this costs the global economy around $5 trillion US. So if we look at Europe, we can see that the problem is equally as bad. We share this global problem. We get around 500,000 deaths in Europe due to air pollution. And in our local group of Belgium, France, Germany, Netherlands, and the UK, something around 200,000 deaths each year, and that's a minimum. So that's pretty stark futures, pretty stark picture. So what about the future? Is there any hope? Well, if we look at some of DEFRA's data, we can see that air pollution concentrations are coming down. If we look at nitrogen dioxide, top left, and large coarse particles like dust, which we call PM10, the top right, they are going down. The concentrations, the ambient concentrations in all different locations, roadside, urban background, rural background, are going down over time. For smaller particles, PM2.5 in the bottom left, it's less of a clear picture. They seem to be plateauing, and there's some quite wide error limits on that. And in terms of ozone, arguably we can see that going up. But air pollution, I guess a good thing that we're getting now is we're seeing it's getting a lot of attention. We're seeing it in the press all the time now. We've got a lot of attention on air pollution, and we see these headlines, these dramatic headlines that are linking it to various different health endpoints that we didn't really think about previously, say in the 1950s. Things like air pollution is linked to heart disease, air pollution may cause dementia, things like this. There's a lot of research going into it right now. So I wanted to end on where the research is going and things that we should be looking at. Something that we don't do as standard is measure these teeny tiny particles, these ultrafine particles, which are nanometer in size. So if this is a human hair here in this diagram, and you can see coarse particles wrapped around it. And if you zoom into those coarse particles, you can see fine particles wrapped around that coarse particle. And you zoom in again, these tiny red dots are these ultrafine particles. And they're extremely penetrative. They get really deep into the lungs and can pass into the bloodstream. And they're very difficult to measure. They've got no measurable mass, but they occur in massive numbers, and they're really harmful. So a lot of our research needs to sort of go into this sort of new area of looking at these new pollutants, which aren't really being monitored right now. So yes, there is hope for the future. Emissions and ambient concentrations of these so-called classic pollutants like nitrogen dioxide are coming down in the UK. We do see some issues still with fine particles and ozone. And there's this real urgent need to shift our focus of our measurement and our research towards these new sort of so-called next generation pollutants, including these ultrafine particles, and investigate the impact on health and climate so that we can form effective legislation to protect ourselves. And that's it for me. I'll pass over to back to James.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Let me just put my camera back on. Thank you very much for that scene setting and that positive note at the end that there are activities and actions that we can all take to reduce these emissions. But it gives us the context of where we are. So before we move on to our next set of speakers, I want us to go to the Mentee polling I was talking about. So here you go. This is the Mentee poll. So you need to get it up on your phone. Can we just check the code that we've got? Because I just saw two different codes there, Rosie. It's the code at the top there. Okay, so everyone, when you go to your phone or your tab, you should get something, if I just hold it up to my camera, that looks like this. For anyone who's never used it before, it's really, really simple. You punch in the code, 2163. I'm going to participate as well because I can. Submit, and then you should be taken to a page that looks like this. It seems a lot of you are joining in already. So you get something like this, and then you simply choose the answer that's relevant to you, scroll to the bottom and submit. So the first question is, does your organization have a strategy to reduce carbon and air quality emissions? 4 answers, fairly straightforward. Yes, 1 in development, no or don't know. We've got about 120 delegates on today, and we've got about 60 of you who've responded so far, so we'll give it a few more seconds for you to make your answers. So when we get to near the 100 mark, we'll close it. There we go. Okay, so we got a good strong bar and the bar chart there on, yes, we've got a strategy to reduce that. That's really good. So about 60%. And the majority of you have got something in development as well, which is really good. Now, of course, we do realize that we're combining carbon and air quality here. They are quite different impacts, but generally from the same source, the same aspect to use ISO 14001 language. So if you're going to tackle one, you might as well tackle the other. Excellent. Okay. Super. Thank you. So on to the next question related to this. So you might have a strategy, but has your organization set a commitment to be net zero, a target, in other words, for carbon and or air quality? So a reduction strategy is one thing, but what's the target and when are you going to get there? Do you have one? Again, yes, no, don't know, or there's one in development. So we just need to open the voting. There we go. Cool. You probably realize that your phone or your other tab should automatically move on to the next question. And if it doesn't, it'll give you a little pop-up to say, do you want to move to the current slide? I can see some of you putting some questions into the chat box, which is really good. Thank you for doing that. Ultrafine particles, not to be confused with UFOs. That could be a typo, a slip on your keyboard. Thanks, Kevin, for answering those directly. Okay, so we're getting a similar profile to the strategy with a target. That would make sense, but of course, strategies normally come first before you start setting targets. So I'm just leaning in to see how many people have voted. Okay, that's good. Great. So again, we're seeing strong, what's that, 84% of organizations that have got 85% that have got strategy and targets to become net zero and or reduce air quality. Wonderful. Thank you, Rosie. Should we move to the third question? So here we've got a word cloud. You've got 3 opportunities to enter a word or a short phrase. So what are the barriers preventing you, your organization, from reducing the impacts from poor air quality and climate change? You've got 3 possibilities to enter, up to 25 characters in each. So what's stopping us from going more quickly? What would be good to remove? What are the hurdles that we need to remove? Okay, cost and finance, yeah. Obviously moving to cleaner, more technically advanced machinery can be costly. There's a knowledge issue as well. Yes, I'm not surprised here. Cost is coming out in the middle. As you probably know, these word clouds work on a simple algorithm that the more times that a word is put in, the bigger the word looks on the screen. Knowledge, lack of knowledge, yeah, that's coming up. Understanding. Engagement, interestingly, which is entirely what today is about, engaging up and down the value chain to understand and learn and educate. And now it's getting too small for me to read. But we can clearly see that there's some key issues in there. We're going to capture this as well, and we'll circulate these slides from the Mentee as part of the output from the webinar today. So it's useful information that we can all share. You get a nice little PDF download when we save it. Great. So I think we should move on there. Thank you for your input on that. So this is a ranking question. So go to your next slide. The Mentee now will ask you to choose out of those 5 options, which organization you think has the most influence in this space about choosing and prescribing air quality standards or reducing greenhouse gases. Who's got the most influence in this space? We've got government, we've got clients, and obviously client can vary in terms of which space you're working in, your contractors, your suppliers, and then the OEMs, the manufacturers as well. Okay, so government is out in the lead. It'll be interesting for the speakers and for when we get to the panel Q&A to think about this one. Why are we putting, at the moment, government in first place and clients second? I'm sure many of you have got good ideas and lots of anecdotes to talk to that. And are they the right organisations to have the influence as well? Should it be in somebody else's hands? How can we all have an influence in this space? Okay, so it's settling down now as we get into the mid-70s of votes. Government in the lead, setting standards, I presume, legislation, NRMM tiers and so on, local air quality zones, clean air zones and so on, and clients, yes, that would make sense. Okay, super. If we move on to the next question when you're ready, please, Rosie. This is the penultimate question, 5 of 6. Again, similarly, this is a word cloud. Enter your phrases, your words up to 25 characters in each, on which technologies or other opportunities you see as the best ways of addressing air quality and carbon emissions. Now, what you describe and define as best is up to you. Is it the quickest? Has it got the biggest impact? Is it the cheapest? Is it the easiest to use? Hydrogen has come up early doors there. Yep, there's a lot of talk about hydrogen, particularly in the housing sector at the moment. Battery technology. Excellent. Sustainable design. Maintenance is a good one. We're talking about whole life impacts here. Circular economy, not just upfront impacts. HVO gets an outing as well, which is really good. And then some of the renewable technologies. So we're seeing a blend here. It says to me that there's no one size that fits all. There's a selection of routes to addressing these issues. Cool. Hybrid technology as well. Excellent. Okay, so last question. How much does your organization invest in cleaner plant? And again, we've just seen various different versions of what cleaner plant and equipment might be in the previous question, compared to what you might do as business as usual. And there's a few options there. You might not know. If you know that you do and you're not entirely sure, give it your best guess. No one's going to come and check your homework. But it's interesting to know across the piece what kind of investment profile you might have in your life cycle depreciation models for what you buy, what you hire, what you use. This will be linked, of course, to your strategy. If you have a strategy to be lower air quality impact and lower carbon, then that should feed through into this kind of thing as well. Okay, so we're probably almost done. So seeing a good spread, it's pleasing to see there's quite some significant investment in cleaner equipment in some shape or form. And for the 40% or so of you who are not sure, that's obviously a question to take back to the people who might know, and put a tricky question to them, put them on the spot. What are we doing about this? Okay, super. Thank you very much, Rosie. We'll pause that there. And thank you for your engagement from the audience. That's really good. As I say, we'll download the PDF slides of that Mentee output and circulate that with the main slide deck as well for the session. Okay, so back to our main content. We've now got a series of presentations from a collaborative effort that's working on the HS2 main works at the moment, and we've got 3 presentations from the value chain that are working together on various stages of the HS2 works, but collaborating as well on air quality and climate change. So first up, we've got Andrea Davidson, who's the air quality lead at HS2. And Andrew is going to speak to us about the clean air policy that they are pushing forwards. So, Andrew, over to you.
Great. Morning, everybody. As James just said, I'm the air quality lead on HS2. I have spoken at a few of these events before, so you may have seen me. Don't think they look like that picture anymore, but that's what lockdown does to us all, I suppose. If you don't know where HS2 is or what HS2 is, which I'm pretty sure I'm preaching to the choir here, it's obviously the British new high-speed railway line. Phase 1 covers London to Birmingham, and that's where we are at the moment in terms of construction. So we got notice to proceed in April and have now worked into our main work civil contracts. Phase 2A is the stretch from Birmingham to Crewe, We're expecting royal assent any day now, and all the requirements I go through in a second will all apply to phase 2A the minute we get royal assent. And then phase 2B, heading up to where you've got the orange lines there to Manchester and Leeds, is currently sort of in the environmental statement stages. So from an air quality perspective, our real drive is to be industry leaders in setting emission standards and really to leave a legacy across the route around low emission equipments and alternatives. So jumping through to sort of what our objectives as a project are, it's essentially to avoid pollutants to the atmosphere. Where we cannot avoid them, to avoid exposure where we can. We obviously have a huge volume of residential properties along our route, so where we can avoid exposure to sensitive receptors across our route as well as our workforce. It's really important to do that. And where we can't, we aim to reduce emissions by collaborating with others and mitigating against our work. So in a nutshell, what are we doing? And I will go into a little bit more detail, but we've set emission standards. Most of you who have worked on the project, you know these inside out by now. I'm going to give a quick flavor of how we're doing to date as well, just so you can see how well all of you are doing against our requirements, which is excellent to see. We obviously implement best practice dust mitigation measures. We monitor pollutants to make sure our mitigation measures are proving effective. And that is in line with sort of best practice guidance like the Institute of Air Quality Management. And then we also have set trigger alert levels for our dust monitors that should concentrations reach a certain level, that immediate action is taken on site where we can review our mitigation measures. Key there is we put our monitors on our site boundaries, so it's not at relevant exposure. So concentrations at our receptors would be lower through a natural dispersion. So it's again just ensuring that our impacts are contained within our site boundaries. We publish monthly monitoring reports as well as annual reports. I've put the links there. They're all on gov.uk, and I will touch on our air quality and our HS2 and air quality webpage that we released at the end of last year a little bit later in the slides. So then jumping to sort of what, when I say strict emission standards, what do we mean? And as we just saw in the Mentee poll, client having a responsibility in setting these sorts of requirements did feature quite high up. I agree that government first, then going to clients to set policies and set requirements that push the industry in a direction to reduce air emissions and reduce carbon. So from a emission perspective, where we're at as a project is we require all heavy goods vehicles to be 100% Euro 6. We do have targets to be better than Euro 6 as technology improves. So whether that's alternative fuels or alternative technologies or material by rail, all of these sort of feature into that. There are opportunities for exemptions because there are some specialist HGVs out there, but again, it's not the norm, it's an exception, and we do consider them on a case-by-case basis. Light-duty vehicles, so all cars, vans on the project are all required to be Euro 6 if they're diesel and Euro 4 if they're petrol. And again, we've set targets to deploy ultra-low emission alternatives and electric options where possible. When it comes to plant, all our non-road mobile machinery between 37 kilowatts and 560 is required to meet strict emission standards. They currently are stage 4 in the central activity zone and stage 3B across the rest of Greater London and the rest of the country. As I've already said, that includes stage 2A, phase 2A, the minute royal assent is given as well. And from the 1st of January 2022, we will take a step up to be stage 5 in the central activity zone and stage 4 across the rest of the country. The reason we've had those block exemptions in place is following independent advice from the Energy Saving Trust around plant availability at the various stages. But it's really important to note, we classify these on the projects as our environmental minimum requirements. So we do encourage our contractors to take up cleaner alternatives where possible. So as I already alluded to, the question I always get asked after the slide is, well, how well are you actually doing? So I've popped a very quick slide together about where we are as a project through 2020, how we've fared. So we've had over 150,000 heavy goods vehicle trips in 2020, and we achieved 99% compliance. And that includes all of our joint venture contracts, whether it was early works or main works, as well as all utility works. So any diversions as a result of the project that's needed. Since 2017, we've deployed over 4,000 pieces of plant and achieved 99.8% compliance. And the exciting aspect in the space there around NRMM specifically is that this year we've seen 6% of that to be stage 5 pieces of equipment. So it was only released on the market, obviously, in November 2019. And this last year, 62% of all plant on HS2 was above our requirements. So as I said, those environmental minimum requirements, this is where our contractors have deployed stage 4 and 5 ahead of our requirements. And these achievements really are down to sort of a combination of our contractors and yourselves in the supply chain that work on the project, which, I mean, includes most of the people in this virtual webinar. So really, it's a big thank you from ourselves for jumping on board to support our requirements, continuing to push the envelope to show what we can actually achieve when we work together. So we are continuing to deploy and push for low emission alternatives, and are starting to see a lot more electric equipment come to site, renewable energy such as solar or wind, as well as the hydrogen fuel cell technologies and hybrid plants as well. So it's fantastic to see. So jumping a little bit further then, and James has already alluded to some of this earlier, sort of what's the next challenge? Where are we going? So the UK is obviously committed to net zero carbon economy by 2050. And we are expected by the HS2 Minister and all the stakeholders to play a key role in that. So it's all in line with our strategic objective to build, design, and operate HS2 to reduce carbon. And of course, we will play a role when in operation to take cars off the road, to reduce the number of flights, and therefore reducing carbon emissions as a whole. So in saying that, we've obviously made key commitments to reduce carbon, and we've set a target to all our joint ventures to achieve a 50% carbon reduction compared to usual construction methods. And as I've already mentioned, we've set targets to deploy technologies to further reduce emissions. So I'm going to jump to, I don't know if Rosie, I've got a quick little poll just to have a break from my voice for a second. But where do you believe we should be focusing innovation efforts to meet this challenge? So I've just put a few there: dust mitigation, emissions from plants, emissions from transport, alternative fuels, and reducing reliance on diesel. If I give you all a few seconds to, Rosie, is it as simple as everybody just clicking on the slide? Yes.
They have the option to click against each option for the question.
Great. Cool. Can we jump back to the results of that? Excellent.
Going now, Andrea.
Thank you. Great. So, I mean, it's pretty clear. We can jump back to the slides, Rosie. It's sort of pretty clear. James had mentioned it earlier as well. And if you've heard me speak at any of these events before, you will have heard me say a number of times that I don't believe there's one solution fits all. And I think we're in agreement across the room on that. If there was one solution fits all, it would make all of our jobs a lot simpler. But how do we find solutions within the construction industry? Obviously, construction plays a major role in pollutants. So we need to collaborate to find solutions to common challenges. We're all facing similar challenges across the industry. We need to build an understanding and develop evidence. We need to influence policy and get the government to set policies around reducing emissions and greenhouse gases. And we need to be sharing best practice across the industry. So on HS2, we have a number of innovation projects sort of at different stages of maturity across the program aimed at reducing carbon and emission impacts linked to our works. We are collaborating with industry, academia, and supply chain. I've included some of the partners there, but Imperial College London, Oak Tech, Construction Equipment Association, Centre for Low Emission Construction, to look at solutions in the various spaces. Serena and Tom are going to be touching on some of these innovations deployed on the HS2 project and program in sort of their slots after myself. But just to highlight very few sort of innovation projects that we've got on the go, linked to the poll we did a few seconds ago, is around sort of dust mitigation and management. We're looking at proactive solutions to manage dust emissions from sites. So rather than waiting for a trigger alert level to give us a notification that something might not be working from a mitigation perspective, that we can rather proactively manage that than reactively. In terms of reducing emissions from plant, it's obviously a space where a lot of innovation is taking place. One of the latest key ones is we funded an innovation project that resulted in a retrofit solution for the medium engine banding, 150 to 300 kilowatts, to be certified by the Energy Saving Trust at the end of last year. The retrofit solution takes a stage 3A engine to meet stage 5 equivalence. And the reason behind this was really, with our strict emission requirements coming into play, that we could extend the life of some of the higher ticket plant items like drilling rigs and piling rigs, and reducing sort of the embodied carbon by having to scrap machinery just to meet our requirements. Reducing emissions from transport, this has already been touched on, but we are looking at hydrogen dual fueling systems for HGVs. We obviously, as you already saw, have a large number of heavy goods vehicles on project, and it's really important that we reduce our impacts from that, and the solution could reduce greenhouse gases by up to 35%. Alternative fuels, Nigel's going to be speaking about HVO case studies a little bit later, but to test and quantify the benefits of alternative fuels. And then very quickly, the last one, just reducing reliance on diesel. It's obviously a big topic and a lot easier said than done in construction. And we are working with Oaktech and Avante as an Innovate UK funded project to trial ultra-low emission engines, so bio-LPG generators. And if I just pop onto the last slide very quickly, that really just gives a very quick overview and a very quick flavor of where we are at the project in terms of setting requirements and innovating in the space. I've popped a few links together for you. The slides obviously will be shared, so you can click and have a look at some of the press releases on that of where we're heading as a project and where we're focusing attention. And well, Serena and Tom are going to talk a little bit more about it in going forward, but we will continue to share the outcomes of these studies and the lessons learned as we progress with the projects. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you very much, Andrea. That was really interesting. And yeah, I think the clear and obvious message is that there's no one size fits all. There's no silver bullet for all of this. So lots of opportunities to get different technologies involved. And depending on the geographical location in the country as well, it'll be very dependent on connections to the grid, on availability of sunlight and wind, and all the other different connections and so on. Wonderful. So we're going to move now to Serena Ward, who works for SCS. Oops, sorry, going too quickly there. Environmental advisor at SCS Railways, who's going to give us the next follow-on in this journey of collaboration on air quality and climate change. So I can see you, Serena. Over to you.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this webinar today. So yeah, I'm Serena, working as an environmental advisor for SCS Railways on the High Speed 2 project. So I'll just give you a bit of an overview as to the area we're working on. So we cover area south of the High Speed 2 project. So starting in Euston in central London, so bang in the middle of that low emission zone, and then working our way through northwest London out towards Hillingdon and West Ruislip. So very, very residential area, lots and lots of sensitive receptors in terms of air quality. We are currently building over 42 kilometres of tunnel, including 8 vent shaft sites, and the contract is currently worth over 3 billion. So the scale of the project we're working on is enormous. So that sphere of influence to really change things, change the construction industry, is there to be taken. So some of the really exciting things we're working on at SCS, hybrid technology, hydrogen technology, and HVO. So we've got a number of these technologies deployed across our sites throughout London, and we're seeing really, really positive reactions from site teams. As Kevin mentioned earlier, the conversation around climate change, air quality is growing, and people are seeing it in the news, in the media. And so we're seeing that really strong appetite from our site team say, yeah, we don't want diesel generators anymore. We realise the issues they can cause, yet we're more than happy to start piloting these new innovative technologies. Also things like hydrogen tower lights, hybrid tower lights, lots going on. We even got a solar and wind powered unit out at West Ruislip. So the photo on the left is a site called Adelaide Road, which is right in Camden. So central London, and we're incredibly close to residents. Camden Council are very conscious of what we're doing as well. So there we've got a combination of the hybrid generators, the hybrid tower lights, and also HVO fuels, which I'm sure Tom will touch on a bit more from Sunbelt. But in just, I think, a 51-day trial period, which is what we got the data from, we've seen already massive fuel costs and carbon savings. So those numbers are there. So over £3,000 saved in fuel and 13,500 kilograms of carbon equivalent saved. And that's just from 51 days. So we're really excited to carry on running this trial and see what data we can get over the next few months. In terms of air quality targets, so Andrea covered this in great detail about what it is HS2 are asking us as a tier 1 contractor to do. So I think it's really worth emphasizing the point that Andrea made about minimum requirements. So HS2 have set these targets, but said, this is a minimum, go above and beyond, be innovative, try new things. This isn't the standard, see if you can beat it. So yeah, those are the air quality targets that have been set by HS2. And then just in 2020, we at SES, we had over 2,000 unique HGVs registered onto our sites, so by our logistics team, and these were 100% compliant with the Euro 6 standard. We had more than 1,000 unique light-duty vehicles also registered on the project, and 99% compliance there. And just in the year 2020, over 300 items of machinery was deployed, 100% compliant with NRMM standards. And obviously the project is ramping up. We had notice to proceed. We're just getting more and more plant, more and more activity on site. So we're really keen to keep these standards really high. Our air quality specialist on SES works very closely directly with the plant suppliers to ensure that everything is compliant before it even reaches site. So we've got that assurance in place that before anything turns up onto site, we know that it's got all the checks, all the certifications in place to meet our standards. And this has also helped us give really good relationships with our suppliers. So moving on to some of our targets. So these targets have come from our parent companies. So as James mentioned earlier, we are a joint venture of Skanska, Costain and Strabag. So one of the big targets we've got for the year is reducing our idling by 20% on a baseline. So looking at our plant fuel usage, looking at the number of hours the plant is operational, setting a baseline, can we get that 20% lower? So doing that through things like behavioral science, behavioral coaching, talking to the drivers, creating that culture on site of as soon as you see something idling, everyone's there calling it out, going, no, that's not how we run our sites. We're finding it's very much a cultural change. It's really key that you involve people like the drivers themselves, the foremen, the site engineers. So create that environment on site of actually, no, we don't want any idling there. We're also starting to look at plant utilization. So something that we've noticed is, yeah, you can have amazing idling rates and you can have really high plant, your plant can be operational, no idling, but actually if you're only using that piece of plant one day out of 30, why have you got it sat on site? So looking at, okay, plant idling, plant utilization, have we got the most efficient plant on site, and are we planning activities? Are we running our construction programs so we've got plant on site only when we need it? So that's another big challenge for 2021. We also work really closely with our plant suppliers, so people like Lynch, Flannery, Sunbelt, to gather this telematics data, which is really, really valuable data. And then through these conversations, we've been able to talk with Lynch, Flannery, and then feed back to the OEMs, so the original plant manufacturers, the Komatsus, the JCBs, the Wacker Neuson, and feedback on the telematics data we're getting, what sort of data we want, how we want that data to be presented, and suddenly your sphere of influence is so much bigger because you're talking to your supply chain, the plant manufacturers, and you're getting exactly what you need on site. So we're seeing things like the electric telehandlers, the electric excavators, really exciting bits of kit, and we're being some of the first to deploy them. So just next slide. Oh, there it is. So I just wanted to finish by talking about wider engagement. I know when I first spoke to James about this webinar, it was how do you encourage air quality improvements, not just within, say, the environment teams, but also wider across your whole project. So we found that the procurement and the commercial teams are really key. Engage with them early, get involved in those tender reviews, going out to tender, get it into the subcontract works information, get it written into that contract. It's in black and white. It's there from the get-go. As soon as that subcontractor is on our project, they know what's expected. It's not surprise them when you're suddenly asking for NRMM information and asking them to meet our standards. They know from the get-go what SES are looking for. Also, local authorities are really keen to hear what we're doing. So I mentioned people like Camden, also with Ealing, Brent, lots of central London authorities that are very keen that we are actively lowering our impact or actively improving the air quality in their local areas. So we can go to them and say, look, doing all this work, but we've got hybrid generators, we've got hydrogen generators, we've got electric plant, it's going to be quieter, less emissions. That enables a really positive relationship with those local authorities and also community groups. And then also sharing the good news. This is something that's been a bit of a learning curve in SES, that if you run the HVO fuels or hydrogen, share it back with your procurement, your commercial teams, your project managers. Don't keep it just within the environment team. The more people that are involved in a good news story, the better. You can suddenly share that news further and wider. And people really like hearing positive news. Obviously, very difficult times we're currently living in. If you can share that good news story, share the fuel savings, share the carbon savings, get everyone actively involved in that and say, look, all of you came together as a team and played a part in this. People really respond well to positive news, and that's how you can get the ball rolling. Suddenly, hydrogen, rather than just a one-off trial, becomes the norm. People are used to it. So yeah, that's probably my final point. Share the good news stories, share it far and wide, get everyone involved. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Serena. Really interesting presentation there. There's a couple of technical questions for you in the chat box. I'll leave those there for the moment for you around carbon savings and plant idling and how that is affected by stop-start behaviour that you might have operators. So do feel free to have a look at those when you get a moment. We're going to move on to our next presentation now. Just flip the slide forward one. The final piece in the puzzle for this part of the webinar, we're going to hear from Sunbelt Rentals, from Tom and Christian, who are going to take us through the presentation about the equipment that they're providing to meet some of those needs to be cleaner and greener. So over to you, Tom.
Thank you, James. Good morning, everyone. And again, just want to echo the sentiments that we've heard throughout the presentation so far. Thanks to James and Rosie for inviting us on. And thanks to Andrea and Serena for really setting the scene for, I suppose, we bookend the presentation that we've just seen around the client setting some really good push forward thinking targets around air quality. The contractor with SCS Railways, we just heard Serena mention there, around how they've embraced those targets and how they're looking to challenge the supply chain to go above and beyond. So we're going to discuss 3 short case studies around products that Sunbelt Rentals have implemented onto the SCS Railways section in London, and just give you a sense of some of the results that we've seen as we've moved across the project. So as we mentioned, my name's Tom Welland. I'm the Business Development Director in charge of the HS2 project at Sunbelt, and I'm joined by my colleague Christian Spence, who is our Sustainable Energy Manager. I'll move on to the next slide for you. So again, as we've mentioned, I think for us, we wanted to touch on where the key for this success has come from. And for us, it's vital that we get early engagement. And we talked so much in this presentation, and Andrea touched on it earlier, around collaboration, allowing strategic trials, whether it be a short-term innovation that we can put onto the project, or we look at a long-term solution that allows us to really look at those whole life project savings. I think what's been excellent to see particularly from SCS Railways, is their ability to allow us to get early engagement and collaboration. So those targets that Serena spoke about, that's definitely filtered down through to the on-site operations teams, who are really, really open to engaging with us across all of their different applications, their different sites. Everything is definitely niche. So it's about finding that right innovation to make sure that we're putting the application into play. So I'm going to hand over to Christian, who's just going to talk to you very briefly about our roadmap towards lower carbon and emission categories.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, and thank you, James. So yeah, just a little bit of scene setting for Sunbelt Rentals on this slide here. So last year, Sunbelt Rentals went on a discovery journey, really, just to identify what our highest utilised assets were on the ground, to then identify which areas would have the most immediate impact in supporting a reduction in site emissions. So we went to a lot of OEMs and did a lot of due diligence around looking at the low carbon solutions that are out there right here, right now. So we then created our 5 low carbon categories, which you can see on the screen there. So in no particular order, I'll just briefly touch over them now. So our first category is tools. So that includes any handheld battery operated tool or device, and also the small tool charging solution behind that as well, because ultimately with any innovational bit of equipment, plant or machinery, we've got to look at the productivity of that asset on the ground for the end operator. So our second one is electric vehicles and plant. So that includes electric telehandlers, dumpers, excavators, but more importantly, again, the EV infrastructure that sits behind that. So whether that be in a fixed location, on a site compound, and we're also on a feasibility journey at the moment looking at mobile EV charging solutions that can support electric bits of plant further afield on larger sites. Lights is our third category there. This is quite a mature category for us. We've got an array of products within this, from battery only, battery solar, and a combustion engine in the back end of it, just to support those critical applications that absolutely need guaranteed illumination, and also link lighting as well for the rail sector. Our fourth is accommodation and welfare. So again, we're looking at more energy efficient accommodation, B-rated cabins, whether they be mobile or fixed. And our fifth is our energy, which is power generation. And we've taken the approach of looking at this holistically in providing integrated power solutions to support that application on the ground. So where applicable, if it's a very low load consumption, solar may be an option. If the application requires a silent hours component, then we'd be looking at hybrid technologies or energy storage assets to support those combustion engines in the day. We're also looking at overlaying that with a energy management system to look at load management on that site to ensure that the energy consumption that is getting pulled on that site is at its minimum. So the energy at the moment is our main focus, really. There's probably about 6 or 7 different products that we can pull and design as a team to create that integrated solution. We're also looking in these presentations so far, alternative fuels such as your HVO we've been looking at, and there's some other fuel types out there again that we're looking at. So we're taking that category as a really core category for us, and then again further afield looking at emerging technologies such as hydrogen, but more looking at the behind the storage side of that, of the distribution and the storage of that technology. So that's our 5 low carbon categories within Sunbelt Rentals. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Christian. So we'll move on. So we're going to cover off the 3 case studies that we mentioned earlier around some of the innovations that SCS Railways have embraced with us and allowed us to get onto the project. So we're going to just briefly touch on the results that we've seen. So the first one is around the new innovation solar charging station. This was on a site out at Copthall. The challenge there was it's quite a large, expansive site, and they've got a requirement for quite a lot of remote working locations, as well as being able to charge tools in the main compound. So one of the new innovations that we've brought out alongside a manufacturing partner, AJC, is the solar charging station. Solar panel array on the roof, charges the battery inside, and inside those lockers are just standard 3-pin plug sockets, which allow small battery bank charging stations, radio bank charging stations, and any other electrical device that needs charging can be plugged into those lockers. We held a 10-day demo trial period on the site across the period there in October. And over that data capture period, we had some fantastic results. So we saw a 97% runtime from the battery. So that's drawing energy from the solar array and the backup battery. And again, yielding 257 hours of silent running with a 400 kilogram carbon reduction. So again, you can see the figures on the right-hand side there. If we were to annualize those out, taking into consideration the time of year that this went in, and with the daylight hours through the winter, if we take a model that we've used to look at summer running hours and winter running hours, you can expect somewhere in the region of 14-ton saving in carbon over an annualized period, which again is an absolutely fantastic result. What's even better about this is obviously it completely reduces the need for a diesel generator. You know, the traditional way on site was these comparisons, by the way, for everybody listening, is a comparison with a 10 kVA diesel generator. We've got comparisons for larger diesel gen sets, but we thought it prudent to use the existing solution that was on site. So the stores were being powered by a 10 kVA diesel generator, where the existing charging was taking place. So we've taken away the need for the diesel generator, and we've seen the fantastic results there in the reduction in carbon and the silent running hours from battery. We move on to the second case study. So the second case study, I'll just wait for the slide to load on my screen. So this is, again, as Serena mentioned, a huge amount of the sites in London. The challenge is monumental around community and residential piece as well. So on Adelaide Road, they've got a welfare setup that's got some infrastructure that needs to be powered 24/7. This being site lighting, CCTV cameras, welfare facilities in terms of drying rooms and canteens for security, and out-of-hours operatives. So again, the challenge there, really close to the residents, was around being able to run silently overnight. So the solution that we've installed down at Adelaide is a hybrid generator setup. So a 60 kVA diesel generator in sync with a hybrid battery unit. The hybrid unit will automatically kick in at a predefined time. So the site have set this up at 6 p.m. It will switch it over to the battery and then deliver silent overnight power, which again, as you can see, over the 51-day period that the setup has been down on the site, which has yielded the data for us, we've seen that the battery has reduced the need for the diesel generator by up to 70%, which again is another fantastic result in terms of that key metric as well around silent running hours for the residents. So again, silent running hours there of 857 hours, with an annualized carbon reduction of around 97 tons. Again, we've put some social value figures there as well, because again, as Serena mentioned, these metrics can go back into the SCS Railways, back to HS2 Limited, and we can promote the solutions out to the local communities of the benefits that we're trying to bring with innovation to the project. So it's definitely twofold. Fantastic reductions in emissions and fuel usage for that air quality piece. But again, around the silent running and the cleaner air is that huge community engagement piece as well, which is so important on the project. And then we move on to the third case study that we've done working with Serena and the team. So this is around the need for temporary lighting solutions on site. So we've implemented a range of hybrid tower lights across the different parts of the S1, S2 London section of the project. This case study in particular focuses on a site at Willesden Euroterminal. Again, the challenge there was we need to reduce the long-term fuel usage and emissions of the temporary lighting solutions. But at the same time, we need to be mindful of that key principle as well for HS2, which is value for money. So we assessed the application, we assessed the products that were on the market, and the ability to meet the air quality targets that are down on site, but also give that value for money outside of other innovations that may be slightly more expensive and not quite viable. we've taken a snapshot there of 8 Trimmy X hybrid tower lights. Again, what we've seen across the average running time of the 8 lights was 47.6% running time on battery. And the best performing light on the site ran 55% during that 12-week period on battery. So again, a huge increase in silent running hours, non-reliance on a diesel generator, and running time on battery. What's important, and Nigel's going to cover this in the next presentation around the HVO case study. But again, all of the units that we see here that are hybrid, that have a backup generator, the next stage on for us is reviewing the results that we get from running these backup generators on HVO fuel. And as Christian mentioned, other alternative fuels as we move through the project. So that's the 3 case studies in summary. Again, as you can see, it's all about the application. It's all about being able to engage and understand what the sites are doing and what applications we have on the market to be able to put into practice. I'm going to just move on now, and Christian is going to summarise with us around how we see the future of engagement up and down the supply chain going, so that we can continue to see the fantastic results we've seen from these case studies. Thanks, Christian.
Thank you, Tom. And just whilst that slide's loading up, I've just see a few questions coming into the chat. So the first one regarding the solar charge pod, if on a if it is very poor weather conditions, so inside the charge pod there's it's a tri solution. So you've got your solar on top of the roof, electrical assembly and control gear, and a battery storage element inside. And in the event that it is very poor weather, then there's a small 4 kVA combustion engine that would fire up to recharge those batteries to guarantee the small tools have got a power source to them. So hopefully that item answers that one. And the second one, just quickly skimming onto them, how social value is calculated for Sunbelt. So we use the TOMS national framework, but in answer to those sort of case studies that Tom was speaking about then, for every ton of carbon saved in a monetary value on that framework, it equates to £69. So you do the maths or do those calculations, and it would get to the end figure for yourself. So that's just a few there, but I'm sure we've got time later to answer some more questions coming through. But if you can see on our final slide, so we're ultimately looking at collaborating in multiple areas really, but if you look on the left hand side, we're carrying out live strategic trials at the moment just to do the due diligence around all of these new innovational assets, because ultimately they've got to be reliable and repeatable for us as a plant rental provider in the industry. So they've got to be a reliable asset, they've got to be a repeatable asset, and they've got to be also commercially viable, and then overlaying the environmental benefits of that new product versus the traditional. So on the left hand side, we've got quite a few strategic trials, and we would love, myself and Tom and Sunbelt Rentals would love to speak to anybody on here if you'd like to find out more about strategic trials and how we could work and overcome some challenges that you may or may not be seeing right here today. So thank you. That's it, Tom.
Thanks, Christian. Thank you very much.
Super. Thank you very much, both of you, Tom and Christian.
Thanks,
really good presentation, and interesting from my point of view to see the social value angle being brought in there. I think that's really good. So, you know, the business case is stacking up. There's cost savings, there's reduced emissions, reduced carbon as well, and social value benefits as a consequence of that. Thank you both. Okay, great. We're going to move on to the fourth and final presentation of the morning. We've heard a little bit already mentioned about HVO specifically, and I'd like to welcome Nigel Blandin, who works at GAT Group for Group CI in the Channel Islands, who's going to take us through some work that they've been doing, and particularly centred around a trial and case study on the use of HVO. So I can see you, Nigel. Over to you when you're ready.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, James, and everybody. Hello from Jersey. I would say sunny Jersey, but it's pretty miserable as well here today. For Group is an autonomous business unit within the GAT Group Plant and Tool Hire group of companies. We've been part of GAP for about 2.5 years now. And being down here in the Channel Islands, it's a slightly different market. Many smaller projects, but many very high quality projects underway and planned for the future. So a couple of years ago, we took a major decision to change the way we operate the business. And I'll explain a little bit more about it as we go along. So you've heard a lot about HVO today. What is it? It's a sustainably sourced low emission diesel fuel. It's got a circular carbon cycle, and it greatly adds to the reduction of local air pollutants. Generally called hydrotreated vegetable oil, it's sourced using waste fats from fish and meat processing, as well as non-food grade vegetable oils. So it's most definitely not vegan, I can tell you that. Traditional biofuels that people are used to, known as Generation 1 biofuels generally, are available now. So the B7 FAME blends that we're all used to. And HVOs produced, well, the traditional ones are produced by an esterification process to create them. As HVO is slightly different. Hydrogen is used to split the oxygen, strip the oxygen from the oil molecules, and then they're split to produce hydrocarbons. So it's a diesel fuel. The CO2e pollutant savings are made because while they're still produced by burning the fuel, the original growth of the source materials in nature absorbed the carbon from the atmosphere whilst it was growing. So it's a circular economy of fuel production, and it's about 90% reduction in the production of or the emission of carbon equivalent pollutants. HVO is a much higher quality fuel than traditional diesel. So diesel's measured in cetane rating rather than octane, as with petrol. The current B7 FAME mix has a cetane of around 51. HVO is over 70 when it's blended with normal fuel, and over 90 when it's operated as a neat fuel. You can blend HVO from 0 to 100% with traditional diesel. It's a drop-in fuel. Slightly less dense than normal diesel. It has a faster burn rate in the engine, and it burns hotter. And this helps create a cleaner burn in the motor, and produces much less particulates, and creates a cleaner exhaust. So local pollution, nitrous oxides and PM particulates are reduced because it just burns more efficiently inside the motor. It also has a much better cold weather performance. It's half as viscous as a FAME diesel at minus 15 degrees. So our Scottish friends in GAP, it suits them very nicely. Blocked fuel filters are a common problem with B7 FAME diesels. There's a filter blocking tendency measure, and the UK has a limit of 2.52 for diesel. The higher the number, the more tendency there is for a fuel to block a filter. HVO measures 1 to 1.1, so it's a greatly minimized blockage tendency. There's no shelf life on HVO, so short-term storage is not a problem on site, in bowsers, in tanks. Microbial growth is almost eliminated as long as it's kept below 30 degrees with just normal good housekeeping. We certainly haven't had no problems over the last year. In the summer, we had a lovely summer in Jersey, and we've had no problems with microbial growth at all. So couple of years ago, beginning in 2019, we decided that's it. My family's been in this industry for 100 years now. Now we're part of GAP, and I said I've had enough of making such a mess. So let's sort something out. So we put in a plan to be what we term carbon balanced by the end of 2022, which is we take a very responsible view on what we emit and then how we mitigate that pollution, and then to become a net zero emitter by 2025. It's a heck of a target to hit, but there's no point in faffing around. We just get on with it. And we're achieving it by completely overhauling how we operate as a plant business, changing what we use as a measure of a piece of equipment that we want to hire and rent out to our customers, how we specify and how we manage that. So it's not only a reduction in our fuel burning emissions, it's a major investigation into our supply chain, how we investigate who we buy from. We ask them a lot of very awkward questions that we actually find a lot of manufacturers either very reluctant to answer or unable to answer at the moment. Investment in a lot of alternative power for our equipment. We basically, whenever we see new electric equipment from a major manufacturer, we order it and then wait years and years and years for something to turn up. We're overhauling how we operate as depots, how we manage our workshops and our waste, but not just looking at the small things, actually looking at how we operate. And then we promote that sustainability to our customers, because we've discovered that sustainability in the short term does cost, and we have to have our customers in a position where they understand the benefits and the efficiencies they get out of it to justify that. And then finally, we've invested in scientific research to identify solutions and benefits that suits our market. We're very lucky in Jersey to have the world famous Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust, Jersey Zoo, who do huge amount of work around the world on reforestation, rewilding and conservation projects, one of the world leaders. So we're actually working with them to understand how conservation organizations can actually communicate with businesses such as ours and yours and help them understand what's achievable and what's possible in their scope of operations. We started investigating HVO a couple of years ago, like I say, and excuse me, my cursor's packed up. There we go. We investigated a couple of years ago looking at what it was and how it operated. And very quickly, the spectre of palm oil reared its ugly head. And we really worried about this a lot, because the first thing you'll find out if you Google HVO is that it contains palm oil. So everybody winces as soon as palm oil is mentioned, and we thought, well, let's find out about it. So we did a lot of investigation with Durrell's. We questioned the World Wildlife Fund and a couple of other specialists in the field. And we also looked at the two suppliers we were identifying. And the one we eventually went for, Neste, have an amazing amount of depth of knowledge and investigation into the procurement of particularly palm oil, but all of their source materials for HVO. They're also very public with it, and they're very open and honest about what they do, what works and what doesn't work. One of the things that we focused on was just how sustainable is this palm oil content. It's about 20% of HVO. And we wanted to understand just how sustainable that was actually, honestly. And I can give you a quote from the World Wildlife Fund, who basically told us palm oil doesn't have to be destructive, and in fact has the potential to be a major force for sustainable development. Which is a very strange statement, but it's about how the palm oil is sourced. Because it's such a highly efficient vegetable oil, it must be sourced correctly to make sure it doesn't overrun the natural world, reduce habitats, reduce biodiversity. It is possible. Neste have satisfied us with the way they manage it, and the information is freely available for those, or if they want to contact me, we can point them in the right direction. So we've run an experiment now for 14 months. Starting with our delivery and service fleet. So we operate in Jersey, range of vehicles with motors from Euro 4 to Euro 6. In the past 14 months, all have run faultlessly. We've had no reported problems with the use of HVO in them. We tested the emissions before and after the introduction of HVO, and the tailpipe emissions were reduced between 40 and 60%, depending on the motor. And the older the motor, the better it works. Modern engines are very efficient, Euro 6, Euro 5 and Euro 6, very efficient already. And the HVO really shows its own in an older, less efficient motor. Again, because it burns hotter, because it burns cleaner, you get less soot, less particulates coming out the back end. Our small vans, Transits and Connects, we traditionally in Jersey have really bad DPF problems. It's like central London every day. Average road speed on a normal small van is about 19 mile an hour over its entire life. We don't have a motorway to give it a good blowout. The trucks average between 11 and 13 mile an hour. So we get a lot of DPF problems. We've had none. We've checked the DPFs. One of our towing vehicles is a Land Rover Discovery 4. Normally they run with a 30% blocked DPF when they go in for service. The one we run is 0. They had to actually change and find another measuring device because they thought it was broken. It just really makes a difference to exhaust emissions. And when you think about that, it makes, therefore, a big difference to local emissions. So working in inner city zones, working in close confines, walled-in areas and walled-in sites, it really does make a difference to the air quality in and around the equipment you're operating. From a CO2 emissions point of view, so we run 3 delivery trucks. Over the last year, they reduced the CO2 emissions output from 41.5 tons down to just over 4 tons. So a massive difference, around 90%, based on the use of HVO. So it worked in our trucks, it works in our vans. We started to introduce it to some of our equipment, and using this knowledge of improved performance on DPF filters and scrubbers, we gave it to some sites to use in telehandlers and site dumpers, which have been experienced DPF problems. Sites in Jersey, like London or any major city, are very small, confined. Machines can't get a good run around, so they're tittling around all day long doing bits and pieces, but never getting really worked hard, and it leads to a lot of DPF problems. We subsidized the cost for the customers, put it into the machines, ran it for a few months, and again we got rid of those DPF problems. The regeneration of the DPF frequency has just dropped. We just do it at service now. They don't have to do them on site, and they're not auto regenning on site. We just bring them in when we service them, and we do them in the workshop. So we then approach customers with data about the environmental benefits to justify the extra cost of the diesel. And some were interested and some were not interested. It just didn't appear on their radar. The larger sites, though, are very interested. As was mentioned before in the previous presentation, early adoption or early discussion of these alternative fuels is really important. So we're now finding that we talk to the customers much earlier in the process about fueling, and we help them understand the benefits to their tendering process, for their clients, and as well for their environmental and social responsibility programs as part of their tender. The cost of HVO, now we have a very different system. We have a completely separate government over here who levy taxes in a different way. We get no rebates or assistance on taxation for HVO. We can have it in red and we can have it in white, and we have to pay the full. We pay 57.4 pence per litre of tax on the white diesel. So it makes it very expensive. Now, I understand on the mainland, the government do have programs in place to offer rebates in certain circumstances for the use of the fuel. So the overall findings, if we use HVO fuel effectively, we can continue with our current range of plant and equipment whilst reducing our pollution by up to 90%. Electrification is coming. We already run JCB electric excavators. We've got dumpers, Wackenoyson dumpers, the new JCB track dumpers. We've got telehandlers on order. We're doing some prototype work for another manufacturer on electric excavators. It's coming, but it's not here yet, and we need to find solutions. Hydrogen on larger construction equipment is a similar problem. It's coming, but it's not here yet. So we've committed to putting the alternative fuels, electrical, hydrogen equipment into our fleets as we can. But in the meantime, we've really decided that HVO is such a benefit to us in reducing our emissions locally and globally that we're now putting it in all of our equipment as we return it to our yards. We're charging the customers a reasonable price for it. We're not making much on it, but we're making a lot of noise about the fact that we provide them with HVO, and we invite them to join us and continue fueling with HVO. It allows us to run our equipment to the end of its natural life cycle. Sustainability is great, but if you're getting rid of a lot of equipment before it's used for its general lifetime, then it's not a very sustainable solution. We're using more embedded carbon in production and transport to replace things that aren't finished with yet. So this way we can use our existing equipment to the end of its natural life cycle and hope that by that time the technologies move further. We can make decisions at the correct time. Our sustainability challenge is based on a very simple idea, that sustainability is just efficiency in action. If we're efficient, if we're elegant, we are sustainable. And it's not just about being sustainable environmentally, it leads to a sustainable business. And all businesses need to get the idea that sustainability in business is sustainability in the environment. And with that, I'd like to leave you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigel, for that interesting case study. Clearly, there's a good case there for HVO. We're going to move now into our panel Q&A. So we've got 15 or so minutes for some questions to the group. So if I could ask all the speakers, please, to turn your cameras and microphones back on, get you into the virtual panel, and then I'll put some questions to you, and we'll take them in turn. Thank you very much to the speakers as well for answering the questions in the chat. I see a lot of those have been answered directly, which is really good. As we've been going along, obviously some quite specific questions, some quite technical questions. That's really, really useful. I'm just going to turn my camera off because there is a limit of the number of cameras we can have. I'm going to put the first question straight back to Nigel quickly, if I may. How widely available is HVO? It sounds really good, but can you get it at your local forecourt?
Right, HVO isn't available at local forecourts. Actually, it is in Jersey, first place, because we have a very interesting supplier. On the mainland, it's generally a trade-only fuel supplied in bulk. It is available nationwide. There are several suppliers. I think Green D Plus are a large supplier, and it doesn't take much digging to find them. But yes, it is nationally available.
Super. So because the question is often one of restricted availability and sourcing. I do understand it is forecourt available in places like Sweden and Norway. They're a lot further ahead than us in many respects, but on this as well. So maybe one day it will be available on the forecourt.
Yeah, I think it's actually an availability of the product. There's such a huge growth that the manufacturers need to sort of get the source material to make enough HVO because it's being looked at in so many different areas.
Cool. So yeah, supply and demand, definitely. Kevin, in our Mentee poll at the beginning, we saw that the audience very much clearly put government out in the lead as having the most influence in this space. So if you wouldn't mind picking up the first question on what do you see as the shifts or changes needed in government policy to encourage a move against these impacts across society? And by government, I mean central, regional, local, and so on.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, but it's a really difficult one to answer. I think what we need is cross party support on a lot harder, more fast acting measures. The trouble with tackling anything to do with air pollution, we need to make big changes, and we need to make big changes quickly. Now, the trouble is, a lot of the things that we need to do are politically unfavourable. But we need to do a lot more research first into this. I mean, what's been really interesting is this lockdown due to the pandemic has made this dramatic decrease in anthropogenic activity, which has kind of given us this snapshot into a sort of towards a net zero future that we might expect if we do put some of these effective policies in place. But what we've noticed, our research tells us, it's unlike a lot of the headlines that you've seen, air pollution has not necessarily got better because of stopping cars and people staying at home. In fact, ozone and UFPs and fine particles have got worse during lockdown. So I think at this point, a lot the government needs to fund more research into this so we can understand better how we take the right steps towards a big picture net zero.
Cool, that's really useful. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. If I could come to Serena, there's something here that you mentioned telematics in your presentation, and I think that's something that many of the OEMs and all the plant hire companies have talked about as well. How do we make more of those digital technologies to really drive forward being more efficient, lower emissions, obviously, cost savings, and so on? What's the role for those kinds of digital technologies?
So yeah, we've had massive, really benefited from telematics on our site. I think the real power you can get from that data is you can then go back and enable those conversations with your site teams and with the drivers themselves and say, look, by not idling, you've saved this many litres of fuel, which your commercial teams, your procurement teams immediately interested in. You also say you've saved this much carbon, you've made the air this much cleaner on site. You've reduced your exposure to all these pollutants that Kevin mentioned. And yeah, you can't argue with the data. You're proving that you're making your site a cleaner, nicer forest to be in, not just for the local community, but also for those people working on your sites day in, day out. So yeah, it's really, really powerful data to have.
James, I'll come in on
Please
there
do,
and just add to what Serena said there. So one of the things we're working on at Sunbelt is a unified dashboard to be able to bring in all of the telemetry, telematics data from all of the assets out on site into one portal for the likes of Serena and her team to be able to access to get that raw data. I think it's important as well that for the data, that's a great tool to shape behaviours and cultures on site as well. So we're monitoring the data. It's able to look at an asset that might be in application. Again, as we've said, cost is a big factor. So, is that asset performing as it should? Do we need to take that asset away and reposition it somewhere else? Or is there a more suitable alternative once you look at the data? So I think also it's important that the data is clear. And there's been a few questions in the chat that we haven't had a chance to go back to everybody, but questioning, how is the social value worked out? How are we working out some of the figures? Myself and Serena had this conversation this week. The telemetry and the dashboard is really important to be able to make that clear so that we're all on the same page of how we're working out the results, to make sure that, there's that word that gets bandied around greenwashing, to make sure we're not just over egging what these results are saying, that they're true, they're auditable, and they're going out to the wider construction industry to be able to be useful and not give false hope. I think that's all I wanted to add to that.
No, super. Thank you, Tom. No, good message there. Andrea, can I come to you for the next question, please, if I may? And it's one we've talked about many times before in the past about collaboration, and we talk about it a lot on Supply Chain School webinars and events, because clearly that's what the school is all about, collaboration and consistency. But to use a word that Tom just mentioned there about greenwashing, how do we avoid that kind of bit of lethargy about collaboration? How do we truly inspire real collaboration? And I'm coming to you because kind of HS2, you're at the top of the pyramid in this. How do you drive forward collaboration from where you're sitting?
I think it's a really good question, if nothing else. But essentially, working with partners that have the same aims and objectives, and again, it sounds easier said than done. But we need to be working together to deliver solutions across the supply chain and across common challenges that we have. So, I mean, your question of what does that actually look like? It's rather than working in isolation, we work together. So rather than all looking at the same challenges and coming up with our own ideas and ideals and testing, and essentially, as Kevin discussed in the beginning, we've got this challenge to reduce emissions sooner than later, that we come up with different solutions to implementing construction. So what does that look like? I mean, it's essential that we work with government to develop policy. And when I say that, often find policy is written by people who have never stepped foot onto a construction site before. And it's really important that we involve all sort of different levels. So whether that's SMEs and trade bodies, such as the Construction Equipment Association, to ensure that the policy set and targets set are in fact achievable. And then working with other bodies such as Highways England Network Rail, Environment Agency, I3P, Catapult, and the likes, to come up with sort of options together and sort of the solutions to meet our challenges.
Super. No, that's really good. And that spins me into my next question back to Kevin, if I may, about is there enough low carbon renewable energy available for all our needs? So I'm thinking more than just the sector that we're talking about here today. So static, but mobile, whether it's electricity, heating, transport, or the general uses of energy. Do we have enough available? And if not, when will we?
I think what we have to do is we need to move more towards renewables. But the major issue that people don't generally consider in this is, yeah, we can put out wind farms, we can put out solar farms, and we can generate the energy, but it's storing that energy when it's not in demand. So that our rate limiting step in all of that is producing the right kind of batteries to store all that energy. And according to my geology colleagues, we don't actually have enough rare earth minerals to produce all the batteries that would be required. So I think it's storing that energy is the big issue at the minute. That's our big challenge.
No, an interesting point. It's something we haven't touched upon so far. I mean, of course, liquid fuels are storage in and of themselves, but it's all that lovely renewable energy we have in our island that we need to capture. Thank you, Kevin. Sorry, I'm just looking down my list here briefly. Something we've touched upon a little bit is the embodied energy, something that Nigel mentioned about, touching on circular economy and, extending the lifetime of products of the plant and equipment. So if I come back to Nigel on that one, just to continue that thought process about how we keep plant and equipment going for as long as possible, circular economy thinking, embodied carbon, and so on, because that's clearly as much of an issue as the on-site direct emissions.
It is, because when the requirements are there from major contracts to put in certain levels of equipment by given dates, especially at the moment, all the plant manufacturers are really struggling with demand. If you try and order anything at the moment, you'll be waiting a fair old time. So the ability to use current assets for their full cycle, I think, is vital, because it's just not right to get rid of them, to perpetuate this cycle of renewal for the sake of meeting a standard, when, to be honest, the modern, the latest Euro 6 or Tier 5 equipment is incredibly efficient, where the difference between these Euro levels and tier levels is really, really small. The returns for the investment the manufacturers put in are very incremental returns. So if we can use alternative fuels in what we currently have, we can be more sustainable over a longer period, until the technology has moved on to allow us to then put, say, hydrogen fuel cell machines on a site and come to it when we need to.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, it's that holistic life cycle approach, isn't it, to all our key impacts. Thank you, Nigel. Serena, I've got a question for you about different ways of working and behaviour change. one of the things that you mentioned was about operator behaviour, and I would very much agree that it's not just about the kit and equipment, but it's how you use it as well. So any thoughts you've got on how we shift the dial here on behaviours as well as the equipment itself?
Yes, this is something we've been very keen on in SES. We actually have a whole training program, a whole team who focus specifically on behavioural management, and it's a very strong ethos that's rolled out across the whole of the joint venture. So we have behavioural trainers and behavioural coaches that work with us on sites to roll out a number of different teams and awareness courses. And I think it comes down to just having that conversation, and actually appreciating that you're talking to a driver who might have been operating this piece of kit for 20 years and they are an expert at what they do. Just because you've got the data on the fuel and the idling and the emissions doesn't mean that you can do their job better than them. So involving them in the conversation and going, actually, you know your bit of kit inside and out. What's your opinion on how we can do things better? I've got the data on the environmental side, but you are the expert in this field. So yeah, definitely more of a conversation. And then we've also done things like league tables and leaderboards. We've got multiple different sites, so we can have monthly idling averages for each site, and that's quite good, almost friendly competition between the different foremen who can have the lowest idling rates for the month. And then we do things like free breakfast vouchers as well. So yeah, just adding a bit of healthy competition into the mix.
Thank you, Serena. I think that word engagement and conversation is key in this. Everyone has got something to offer into this conversation, whether it's through data or experience or technology. So no, wonderful. Thank you. Tom and Christian, if I could come to you about how you see your role, but others up and down the value chain in terms of influencing your peers, your competitors, anyone else in the supply chain to move to something that is more efficient, both whether it's carbon or air quality or both, to something that is intrinsically more efficient and cleaner, but also can be operated more efficiently, just following on from where Serena was. How do we engage and have that influence?
I think from my perspective, it's the first slide that we presented that we touched on, James, was it's that early engagement, and it's that engagement piece across multiple stakeholders within a business. So within SCS Railways, as Serena has mentioned, you've got the operational teams on site that use the equipment. So there's education pieces around the use of telemetry and behavioural and culture. But then again, it's engaging commercial teams as well. Listen, it's an unsaid thing quite a lot of times, but we work in a world where a lot of businesses are big FTSE 50 PLCs, and the bottom line is still king. So I think it's changing that culture and behaviour around not looking at the upfront cost of some of this innovation, but it's changing that behaviour to look at the back end and true full life benefits of using the information. If that makes sense, without trying to put a negative spin on innovation, certainly there's still a lot of head-on meeting with people around the upfront cost and that trade-off tipping point around the benefits that it does yield. So there definitely needs to be, I think, from policy setting, there needs to be a strive to make projects more geared around not just looking at the profit at the bottom line, but looking at actually rewarding some of those other benefits, environmental, air quality being probably the top of the list.
Agreed. Just to follow on from Tom, I mean, ultimately incentivizing any organisation to adopt lower carbon solutions and technology should be addressed to accelerate the rate or uptake of that product type. But the whole chicken and egg space with this innovational area or innovational change in areas, ultimately we need to stop looking at the traditional method, because that traditional method eventually is going to be a dinosaur. So doing the analogies and quantifying what traditionally would have been on that site to now looking at the technologies that are available right here today, we need to maybe look at the approach of looking at the challenge and plugging the hole with the actual solution that's going to achieve those objectives. And ultimately just look at those challenges. So is it air quality? Is it greenhouse gas emissions? Is it a noise pollution challenge, whatever the challenge may be. That's the area that we need to address, and just all of us collectively in the plant industry supply a service or solution to support that key question right there.
That's great, Christian. Thank you. And that says to me that it's back to Serena's point about engagement. There's a lot of stakeholders you've just kind of implicitly mentioned there. You've got procurement and commercial, you've got site managers, you've got QSs, the plant hire companies, the environment and sustainability people, the communities within which you work and the clients you work for, all have got a vested interest in some or all of this. And all this information that we've been talking about is useful to some or all of those audience stakeholders. Okay, penultimate question to Andrew, if I may, and this is a bit of a biggie. So how do we ensure a zero carbon and low air quality world is accessible to all businesses? How do we make this an inclusive direction that we all want to go on?
Question. We need to work together. We need to be sharing our innovations and our case studies and our solutions that we are all driving in the sector. And we need to come together to set clear aims and objectives and goals to meeting that requirement. But we all have a part to play. And every small step counts towards it. But if we don't work together, we're going to have small solutions in isolation, which won't be good for the sector.
Excellent, and I like the point there about making small steps. We're never going to get to the right solution in our view, in my view, straight away. We've got to get on and do something and continue working it out as we go along. Okay, so kind of, I suppose for the rest of the audience, and this is open to all the panel, what's the one thing in your view that listeners can start doing tomorrow to be active and reduce carbon and reduce air quality?
I think from a personal perspective, very, very simple. Leave your car at home and get on your bike.
Nice.
From a very, very simple perspective. But I think for me, from a plant hire company perspective, it's having people opening their minds to the art of the possible. I think for me, it's allowing your business to be open to new innovations, listening to the case studies, not just ringing a company and ordering, as Christian mentioned before, what you've always ordered before. I've always ordered a 100 kVA generator because that's just what I've always done. It's about us challenging that, but it's also people opening their mind to the ability of some of these innovations and letting them have a chance on their projects. I think that's
giving them a good fair go. Yeah, good.
I think the question would just be: is there a smarter way, or is there a better way? That's it. And if there is, we should be looking at it collectively. You know, I think just if we can always, before we get to wherever we need to get to, just think: am I offering or providing the best solution, or is there an alternative or a smarter way out there? If so, let's go down that rabbit hole and actually do the due diligence it's deserving to then get to the right decision.
I'll jump in there. I think, to me, it's honesty. We have to be honest with ourselves. We have to be honest with our businesses, our boards, our clients and customers, and say, are we actually doing what we're talking about and what we're thinking about? When we're honest and we honestly understand the challenges ahead, then we can approach them. And I think that's the key. It's not just agreeing and saying, yes, we will, and looking at it. We've set a very, very hard goal to meet. Whether we meet it or not is almost irrelevant, but we've set the goal. And we have to be honest about how we report what we do. So I think honesty is the answer.
Super. Thank you very much, everybody. That was a really good Q&A session. Thank you to all my speakers. I'm now going to flip the slides on to a short presentation from myself on the supply chain school and the plant group. So if I could ask my speakers to turn your cameras and mics off for the moment, that'd be great. Thank you very much, everyone. If I just advance the slide. So as I mentioned right at the top of the webinar, I run the school's plant group. one of the many category groups we have in the supply chain school. And that's the reason where this is all coalesced from and where this webinar has started from. So the plant group has its own page on the school website. You can find it quite simply. That's what it looks like. And it contains a wealth of information around air quality and greenhouse gas emissions and all the work that the group is doing. Just to give you a sense of who's actively engaged, this slide shows all the partners in the supply chain school, the partners being the organisations who fund and direct and steer the work that we do and we deliver on behalf of the whole sector. And those circled in red are those who are active in the plant and equipment group. It's been running for 2 or 3 years now, focused on those key issues that we've been discussing this morning. So you can see there's a broad range of organisations there who are actively engaged, from suppliers through plant hire companies, tier 1 contractors, and clients as well. We've been very busy developing a lot of resources and information for the sector. We've done lots of events like this when we were allowed to meet up face to face. We have done so, as you can see those middle 2 pictures on your screen. We've also developed learning content for the school, one particularly on air quality in plant and equipment, but others related to that as well. And importantly, we have developed what we call our plant category group minimum standards. So this is similar to some of the stuff we've heard earlier today, where we're talking about what's the bare minimum you should be using on site, ideally, when you buy or hire equipment. If you can go better and go cleaner, then by all means do so, but these are the minimum standards we would expect based on a lot of interaction with industry. We've just conducted our second round of interviews with OEMs as to what is feasible, what's practical in the marketplace today and in the years to come in terms of those power and fuel options. Cleaner diesel, HVO, hybrid, battery, solar, hydrogen, whatever the fuel might be. And it will be dependent on the equipment and the location and the task at hand. But what are those options available to us? So we can start charting a route to cleaner air in both senses of the word. So those are the minimum standards. As I say, we did a big process back in 2019. We've just gone through a revision of that just prior to Christmas. And in fact, later today, I'm speaking to a lot of the OEMs who manufacture extendable platforms, MUPs, on exactly this. What can they do in that part of the sector? So out of that came the plant charter, and this is a public-facing document, a public declaration of wanting to sign up and state that, yes, we're doing something specifically on air quality and greenhouse gas emissions. You can see the current signatories there. We have more contacting me on a weekly basis, but this is as I say, a public-facing version of the minimum standards. What are we doing about this? How are we actively engaging? How are we measuring and monitoring this? And how are we including innovation? So it's something that is gaining traction within the sector to make that statement that these are important issues and we're taking them seriously. One of the discrete outputs that we have developed in the plant group is a mapping system on the UK's clean air zones. So we'd previously developed a map on material exchange platforms, an entirely different subject. It's all around circular economy and leftover materials at the end of a site's production and manufacture, and can those be used elsewhere rather than being chucked away effectively. We've used the same process for mapping the UK's clean air zone. So anywhere that's got an LEZ or a CAZ, we've mapped it, and we're very close to publishing this live on the school's website, and it's interactive. You can go into it and you can say to yourself, where am I going to be working? Is there an issue around clean air zones? Are there restrictions around the emissions that I'm allowed to produce out the back of the vehicles and plants that I'm going to use? So you can see the areas highlighted, and as you dig into it, you get more and more information. I'm not expecting you to read that box in the middle, but essentially it gives you all the information you need to know about that clean air zone. What are its boundaries? What is it relevant to? What's the scope of it? What are the potential fines if you don't adhere to it? And where can you find more information? So it's a bit like a yellow pages, but interactive, so you can find out more information. And we as the plant group will keep that up to date as clean air zones come in. Many of them have been delayed, as you probably know, because of the pandemic, but they are still due to come in at some point. So we'll go through a process of keeping that up to date. And it's an interactive place where you can come and find out your first course of information before you go off and discover more, if you happen to have a project in those locations. So useful tools, useful learning for the sector. So from my point of view and the plant group, the next stages for us is, do get involved, do get in touch, come along and get involved in the plant group, either as a partner, sign up and become a partner to the school, or get engaged in some of the interviews and the interactions that we have with other stakeholders in the sector. And ideally, if you're in the right position, then signing the commitment charter as well would be a wonderful thing to demonstrate that commitment. Okay. So we're coming to the top of the hour, top of our 2 hours. I think we've had some remarkable presentations, some really optimistic views on what we can do to tackle collaboratively these two main issues. But I'd just like to provide a few summary comments that I've picked up through the last couple of hours. There's certainly no one size fits all. There's all kinds of different technologies and different routes to tackling this, and they'll be dependent on the location. Whether you're in a Hebridean island or you're in the middle of the central zone in London, they are very different geographies, different tasks, different requirements. We've heard about electric and hybrid and HVO and solar and so on. But the big issue that Kevin pointed out is storage. That's something that really needs to be tackled. That's a key, not so much a blocker, but a rate determining step, to use Kevin's language. We've talked about minimum standards, but we can all go better where we can, where we have the desire, where we have the targets, the budget necessarily as well. So we can certainly do that. And it's more than just the machine, it's the person as well. It's the behaviours and engaging with those different people who buy, who hire, who manage plant, who operate that plant and equipment. And it's not just about the carbon dioxide and air quality that we've been talking about today. We've heard about social value. We've heard about whole life cost saving. We've heard about circular economy and embodied carbon. So there's a lot of things that we can hit at the same time by addressing these issues. And that involves many people up and down the supply chain, the procurement, the buyers, the hirers, and so on. And this can lead to more than just being compliant with what we need to do. There's a lot here about winning work, about stakeholder reputation, and improving all of those aspects. And to get there, I think what we've demonstrated today is that we need to have a common vision, a shared vision. And I think what I've heard through those presentations has definitely demonstrated that. So with that message, I'm going to leave it there. We've got 3 minutes to go, so you get off a couple of minutes early for your lunch. You'll notice on your screen that we've got a green banner saying complete the feedback form. We'd be really grateful if you could go in and do that. It's online. There's a few questions and radio buttons for you to click. That's really helpful for us when we organise and present these webinars. But other than that, thank you very much for your attendance and have a good afternoon.